Oh, hey there, big strappers. I didn't see you there. In fact, I can hardly see anything with these glasses on. Today's video is brought to you by GP Transco. I got their swag on right here. They're a mid-sized carrier out of Illinois. They've got great pay and great benefits like health insurance, life insurance, and a 401k plan. Check them out in the description below. Some of the best days in trucking were the days when the chicken trucks, or rooster cruisers, as some guys like to call them, cruised the interstates, and then later the large cars. And they were the hot rods of the day back then. In this video, I'm going to take you back to those glory days. Once a common sight on our interstates, today these trucks have pretty much gone the way of the dodo bird, as overregulation and the mega carriers suck the money out of trucking with their cheap freight. But back in the early 70s, running across I-20 and I-40, and mostly at night, were some pretty fast, powerful trucks, and a lot of these guys were lit right up. Some of them had 100 lights or more on their trucks and trailers, and other drivers began referring to them as chicken trucks. And primarily that was because a lot of these guys were hauling fresh and frozen chicken out of the Arkansas area and headed west with them. Now, there was some serious iron involved in this stuff. There were long hood Kenworth, Pete's, and even Freightliners, because Freightliner made a good looking truck back then. And they were powered by the K model Cummins, or the 3408 Cats, or even the V12 diesels. And these trucks were built to cover some serious ground in a short amount of time. Some of these trucks were capable of near triple-digit speeds, because the more loads they hauled, the more money they made. It was simple as that. Back then, regulation was a little more lax. The scales closed at night. There weren't nearly as many bears out on the highway. And the more runs you made, the more money you could make. And the faster you could make them, the more runs you could make. It was as simple as that. Logbooks back then, there were no e-logs, of course. Logbooks back then, you could run as many as you needed to look legal. Now, some of these big chicken trucks also ran big radios too, and that was just part of the deal. That was part of the image, so they could talk to their buddies 60 miles, 70 miles up ahead to find out what the scales were doing. And big radios were also part of these chicken trucks. In fact, I knew one guy that when he keyed up at night, he was drawing so much power on the CB it would dim all his trailer lights. Now, he later solved that problem by adding a second alternator, but that gives you the idea of the scale of the power of some of these big radios. And as the days grew and the years went by, these chicken trucks began to stretch their frames out, and they became large cars. And some of the guys running these large cars decided, well, they were out in the road so much, they wanted more comfortable accommodation. And some of these guys ended up going for the big bunks that you still see today. And back then, the guys running those big bunks didn't really care about the extra weight that these bunks carried on the trucks, because frankly, between you and me, those guys weren't going across the scale anyway. There were a lot of these gypsy truckers at that point began to make a name for themselves. Guys like Jeff England and Charlie Bates and James Gant. And they all really became legends in trucking through that period. Now, just about every state had a few of these big iron guys running out of them. And you'd start to see them congregate at the chrome shops that were starting to pop up to accommodate these guys so they could buy chrome and toys for their trucks along with the fuel. There were chrome shops like Walcott and Bosselman's in Grand Island that sprung up, or the Giant Truck Stop, or the Triple T in Tucson. But most often you could see these trucks congregating, and they always seem to end up in California for some reason or other, but you could see them congregating at Wheeler Ridge or Bakersfield, probably waiting for produce loads. And oftentimes that's where you'd see these guys. The joke was back then that often some of these guys would blow their entire paychecks on chrome and mud flap weights, and you'd have some young truck driver come up to an old hand and say, "What is a large car anyway?" And the old hand would say something like, "Well, when big trucks are changing gears, large cars are changing counties," to give the guy an idea of what kind of speed we were talking about. Or they would say something like, "Big trucks go as fast as they can, but large cars go as fast as they want." That was kind of a joke of the day. Those were good days in trucking. Everybody was making money, and lots of guys were riding low, looking cool on their stool. They were happy. We were all making money. But as we got into the late 90s, the freight rates kept sliding downwards. The cost of everything kept rising, like the cost of fuel was going through the roof. And more of these large car drivers realized that they had to make a change, had to make a different business plan if they were going to keep making money, or some of them just basically retired out. Today, the best place to see these large cars are at the big truck shows like the Mid-America Truck Show or the Great American Truck Show. And I like these new trucks, okay, because mostly those shows are new trucks. But I prefer the old iron, the old large cars of the day. And you see them more often at the smaller truck shows like Clifford, and that's why I like going there. Those were the glory days of large car trucking, and there were plenty of stories from back in the day. Let me tell you one of my absolute favorites. Back then, and I couldn't even tell you the date, the Lettuce King and I had loaded produce in Salinas, and we were headed back east. Now, we'd stopped in Laramie, Wyoming, and we pulled into the Petro for fuel and grab a bite to eat, a quick bite to eat, because you didn't have long. You had to grab a sandwich and go. But there were a couple of big brand new trucks in there fueling beside us. One was a new Kenworth, one was a new Pete. They were both two-tone brown, I recall to this day. They were both big shiny new rigs, and they had their hoods up and they were looking at their motors. So the Lettuce King and I wandered over to check out the engines that these guys were running, and one was a big Detroit of the day and one was a big Cummins, and we got chatting with these guys and they were telling us how great these new engines were and how fast these new trucks were, and they were just unstoppable. Man, they could pull a hill like nobody else. And we thought, oh, you know, that's interesting. Now, back then, the Lettuce King was running an older Pete, but it had a marine engine cat under the hood. And I don't know what kind of power it was putting to the ground, probably around 800 horse, I guess. I'm just guessing. And the amazing thing about that truck was that he could run coast to coast through the mountains and never change a gear. The thing pulled like Jack the Bear. It was incredible to watch. So anyway, we're headed east out of Laramie, and there's a big hill there, a good grade, called Sherman. And if you guys have been out there, you'll have seen it, you'll remember it. So these guys got out ahead of us out of the truck stop and started pulling up Sherman Hill. And we hung back, and when they were good into the pull, the Lettuce King swung out, past the second guy, pulled up beside the first guy, pulled back the stick, dumped the fuel, and the black smoke started to roll. And the guy in the lead truck keys up and says to his buddy behind him, all I heard was, uh-oh. And the Lettuce King just stormed past him and blew up the hill and was long gone by the time those guys even got to the top of the hill. And I'll remember that to this day because it was such an impressive show of power, of horsepower, and I still laugh about it even now. Now, don't get me wrong. Trucking today is exciting with all the new technology and all the new equipment, but I miss the days of these big hood, big horsepower, large car trucks where fuel wasn't a consideration as far as the cost was concerned, and you could just storm up and down the highways in these fancy looking rides. Those are the days I enjoyed the best, and those are the days I miss the most. Take care, drivers. Keep the rubber side down, and I'll see you on the back haul.